Let us construct a VLOOKUP formula together in Excel that will extract full records based on one single lookup value. And this is the third video in a series on VLOOKUP Beginner to Advanced. And in the first method, we shall manually identify our column index numbers. Like you can clearly see, I've looked manually on this entire data set and found out that the last name is actually sitting in column number 2. That's why I've put a 2 over here. The first name is column number 3 in our data set. That's why I've put a 3. So this is manual mapping of the column index numbers, and these are the numbers that we shall use in our VLOOKUP formula. So to do that, I'll come over to the result cell and start writing my formula. I'll say equals VLOOKUP. The lookup value will of course be our staff ID, comma, the table array. This is the entire range of cells that contains our values, excluding the column headers, comma. Now for the column index number, I need point to my numbers that I put up over here, comma, and this time we are doing an exact match, so I'll put a 0, close parenthesis, hit enter key on the keyboard, and there you go. Because last name is column index number 2 in our entire data set, that's why you're seeing a Tegeka is being returned over here. And let us double check that one. When you come over to staff ID number J0105, you'll see the last name is Tegeka, and that's what is getting returned over here. So before I copy this formula to the rest of the cells horizontally, I need to fix some cells to make them absolute. So I'll go back to my formula and fix our lookup value, F4 key on the keyboard. I'll also fix our table array, F4 key on the keyboard, hit enter key once again. Then I can now drag to the rest of the cells like this, and there you go. So the formula is actually delivering to us the entire records, and we have achieved that one by manually mapping the column index numbers in our VLOOKUP formula. So that's the first method of doing it. Now, when you come over to the second method, instead of manually identifying the column index numbers like we did in this first method, we can use the columns function to do that for us, meaning that we are automating column index identification. How do we do that? I'll come over to the results cell and start typing equals VLOOKUP. The lookup value will still be our staff ID, comma. The table array still remains the same. I select the entire cells that contains values, F4 key on the keyboard to lock. Let me also lock the lookup value. Then the table array, the column index number, we need to open the columns function at this point because we don't want to manually identify the column index numbers. We want rather use the columns function to do that one for us. So I'll open columns function, open brackets. I need to give an array. So the array will be I5. That's the row that we are gonna use in our array. So I'll say I5 to I5. The reason why the columns array argument has to remain in I5 is we want to copy this formula to J5, for example, up to L5, and we would like the columns function to identify each column header in our entire data set. And once the column index number is identified, then the value that is sitting in there will be returned. So I lock the first part of our array, F4 key on the keyboard. I leave this one a relative so that when we copy to J5, it now picks the right column header. I close off the columns function. I go back to the VLOOKUP and we shall be doing an exact match. I put a 0, close parenthesis, hit enter key on the keyboard. You can see what is getting returned is the lookup value itself, meaning that there's something that we need to do in there. I'll go back into the formula. So before we close off the columns function, we need to say +1. The reason why we are doing that, we don't want the columns function to return the first column that contains our lookup value. So I'll say +1 such that it can start from the second column that has a last name. I'll come at the end and close brackets, and there you go. It's now the last name that is being returned instead of the lookup value itself. So we need to copy this formula to the rest of the cells. Let me just double check if there's a range that we need to make absolute. There's none, so we can go ahead and copy to the sides. And there you go, the formula is working properly. So let's assume the staff ID changes over here. Let's change it to J0105. Everything updates automatically. Let's change it to J0101. You see that the function is picking the right values and returning it to us. And in our third method of doing full record retrieval, we shall add in the match function to automate that part of column index number identification. Like the way how the columns function was used to identify the column index numbers, let us see how the match function automates that part of the VLOOKUP function. So you'll come over here and say equals VLOOKUP. The lookup value will remain our staff ID, F4 key lock, comma. The table array remains the same. And the column index number, this is the part that we need to open the match function, automate that part. So I'll open match. And the lookup value for match will be, for example, last name, the column header, comma, and the lookup value will be the entire column headers of our data set. F4 key lock that range, comma, and we shall be doing an exact match. I'll put a 0, close parenthesis, hit enter key on the keyboard. So I forgot to close the match function, so I'll go ahead and accept the correction, and there you go. This is the last name getting returned for staff ID J0104. So we need to copy this to the sides. Let me check if there is a range we need to lock. Yes, there is. So we are going to lock our table array, hit enter key on the keyboard, and let us copy this to the rest of the cells, and there you go. So that's how you can use the match function to automate column index number identification inside the VLOOKUP, and you do a full record retrieval. In our next fourth video in a series, we shall look at a more advanced example that involves two lookup values. So thank you for watching. If you found this video helpful, comment, like, and share, and don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel. See you in our next video.